No one could have predicted that the little boy would shout, "Stop! You're doing it wrong!" to Elvis in front of thousands of people. But this brave interruption would transform into one of history's most beautiful moments, with the lesson in grace that the King of Rock would demonstrate. Tommy Harrison was an extraordinary 8-year-old boy with an exceptional ear for music and an unwavering commitment to musical accuracy that bordered on perfectionism. Living in the vibrant music city of Nashville, Tennessee, he had been surrounded by melodies, rhythms, and harmonies since the day he was born. His father, Robert Harrison, was a respected session musician who had worked with some of the biggest names in country music, while his mother, Carol, was a piano teacher who had nurtured Tommy's remarkable musical abilities from his earliest years. From the moment Tommy could walk, he had demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to detect even the slightest musical inconsistencies. He would stop whatever he was doing if he heard a wrong note on the radio, a missed beat in a song, or an instrument that was even slightly out of tune. His parents initially found this trait amusing, but as Tommy grew older, they realized that their son possessed a rare gift: perfect pitch, combined with an instinctive understanding of musical structure and composition. Tommy's bedroom was filled with musical instruments of all kinds: a small drum set that his grandfather had given him, several guitars in different sizes, a keyboard that his mother used to teach him basic music theory, and countless books about famous musicians and composers. The walls were covered with posters of his musical heroes, but none held a more prominent place than the large, framed photograph of Elvis Presley that hung directly above his bed. To Tommy, Elvis wasn't just a singer. He was the embodiment of musical perfection and charismatic performance. The young boy had memorized every single Elvis song ever recorded, not just the lyrics, but every instrumental arrangement, every backup vocal harmony, and every subtle nuance in Elvis's vocal delivery. He could tell you exactly which sessions each song was recorded in, who played what instruments, and even which takes were used for the final releases. His knowledge of Elvis's music was encyclopedic and deeply personal. He didn't just know the songs, he understood them on a level that most adult musicians would envy. Tommy's obsession with musical accuracy often got him into trouble at school and social gatherings. He would involuntarily correct his music teacher when she played a chord incorrectly on the classroom piano, or point out mistakes during school concerts, earning him a reputation as a musical know-it-all. His parents tried to teach him about tact and social etiquette, but Tommy genuinely couldn't help himself. When he heard something wrong musically, his desire to correct it was as natural and irresistible as breathing. Despite his sometimes challenging personality trait, Tommy was genuinely beloved by those who knew him well. His musical insights were often brilliant, and his passion for getting things right came from a pure place of love for music, rather than any desire to show off or embarrass others. His father often brought him to recording sessions, where Tommy would sit quietly in the corner, listening intently and occasionally offering suggestions that surprised seasoned professionals with their wisdom and accuracy. The opportunity that would change Tommy's life forever and create one of the most talked-about moments in music history came when Elvis Presley announced a special concert at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. This wasn't just any ordinary concert. It was billed as an intimate, acoustic performance where Elvis would showcase some of his lesser-known songs and demonstrate his versatility as a musician beyond his rock and roll persona. The announcement sent shockwaves through Nashville's music community, and tickets sold out within minutes of going on sale. Robert, using his industry connections, managed to secure 3 tickets for his family, and not just any tickets, but seats in the 3rd row, close enough to see every expression on Elvis's face and hear every nuance in his performance. Tommy's excitement was almost overwhelming in the weeks leading up to the concert. He spent countless hours preparing, studying the set list that had been announced, and refreshing his memory of every arrangement and every subtle detail of the songs Elvis planned to perform. He even practiced singing along quietly, making sure he knew every word perfectly so he could fully appreciate the live performance. On the night of the concert, the Grand Ole Opry was electric with anticipation. The venue, steeped in country music history and tradition, had hosted countless legendary performances over the decades, but having Elvis Presley on its stage was something truly special. Tommy sat between his parents, practically vibrating with excitement, his eyes fixed on the stage as he waited for his hero to appear. When Elvis finally walked out onto the stage, carrying an acoustic guitar and wearing a simple black shirt and jeans instead of his usual glittering jumpsuits, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the historic building. Tommy clapped so hard his hands hurt, his young face beaming with pure joy and admiration as he watched the king of rock and roll settle onto a simple wooden stool at center stage. "Good evening, Nashville," Elvis said into the microphone, his voice carrying that familiar warm charm that had captivated millions of fans worldwide. "Tonight's going to be a little different from what you might expect. I want to strip things back, get back to the heart of the music, and share some songs that mean something special to me." The intimate setting created a magical atmosphere as Elvis began his performance with a beautiful, stripped-down version of "Love Me Tender." His voice, unadorned by elaborate production or backup singers, filled the venue with pure emotion and vulnerability. Tommy listened intently, marveling at how different yet equally powerful Elvis sounded in this acoustic setting compared to his usual high-energy rock performances. Song after song, Elvis delivered flawless performances that showcased not just his vocal abilities, but his skills as a guitarist and interpreter of songs. Tommy was in absolute heaven, hanging on every note, every chord change, every subtle vocal inflection. This was exactly what he had hoped for, a chance to hear his idol perform with crystal clear clarity in an intimate setting where every musical detail was perfectly audible. The concert was progressing beautifully, with Elvis moving through his carefully curated set list of both familiar hits and deeper album cuts. The audience was completely captivated, hanging on every word and note. Tommy had never been happier in his entire 8-year life. This was musical perfection, unfolding before his very eyes and ears. But then, about halfway through the concert, something happened that would create one of the most memorable moments in both Elvis's career and Tommy's young life. As Elvis began the opening chords of "Can't Help Falling in Love," one of his most beloved and frequently performed songs, Tommy immediately noticed something that made his stomach drop with concern and his musical instincts go into high alert. Elvis had started the song in the wrong key. It was a subtle difference that most people in the audience wouldn't notice, but to Tommy's perfectly trained ear, it was as obvious as a fire alarm. Elvis was playing the song in the key of G instead of the usual key of C, and while this might seem like a minor technical detail to most people, Tommy knew that this key change would affect the entire emotional impact of the song. The lower key made Elvis strain slightly to reach the higher notes, and it changed the song's characteristic gentle, flowing quality into something that sounded forced and uncomfortable. Tommy's first instinct was to assume that Elvis was intentionally trying a different arrangement, perhaps experimenting with the song for artistic reasons. But as Elvis continued singing, Tommy could see the slight tension in his face, the way his fingers seemed to be struggling with the chord progressions, and the barely perceptible strain in his voice as he tried to adapt to the unexpected key change. It became clear to Tommy that this wasn't an intentional artistic choice. Elvis had simply started the song in the wrong key, probably due to the pressure of performing, or perhaps because the stage lighting was making it difficult for him to see his guitar fretboard clearly. Tommy could see that Elvis was trying to make the best of the situation, but he was clearly uncomfortable, and the song wasn't sounding the way it was supposed to sound. For most 8-year-olds, this would have been a minor detail that they might not even notice, and certainly not something they would feel compelled to address publicly. But Tommy wasn't most 8-year-olds. His deep love for music and his commitment to musical accuracy made it physically painful for him to sit there and listen to one of his favorite songs being performed incorrectly, especially when he knew that Elvis was capable of so much better. Tommy looked up at his parents, hoping to catch their attention and perhaps whisper his observation to them. But both Robert and Carol were completely absorbed in the performance, smiling and swaying along with the music. They clearly weren't noticing the technical issue that was causing Tommy such distress, and even if they had noticed, they certainly wouldn't have considered it appropriate to interrupt the performance. But Tommy's musical integrity wouldn't allow him to simply sit there and let this continue. He loved Elvis too much to watch him struggle through a song that wasn't working properly. In his young mind, the solution was simple and obvious. Someone needed to let Elvis know about the problem so he could fix it and deliver the beautiful performance that Tommy knew he was capable of, without fully considering the social implications of his actions, without thinking about the hundreds of people in the audience or the potential embarrassment he might cause. Tommy did what his musical instincts told him was the right thing to do. He stood up from his seat in the third row, cupped his small hands around his mouth to project his voice, and called out in the clear, carrying voice that had served him well in school choir performances, "Stop! You're doing it wrong!" The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Elvis's fingers stopped moving on the guitar strings, as if he had been frozen in time. The gentle melody that had been filling the venue came to an abrupt halt, leaving nothing but stunned silence in its wake. Every single person in the Grand Ole Opry, from the front row to the back balcony, from the sound technicians to the security guards, turned to look in the direction of the voice that had dared to interrupt the king of rock and roll. Tommy's parents, Robert and Carol, felt their hearts skip several beats as they realized that their 8-year-old son had just stopped an Elvis Presley concert in front of hundreds of people. Robert's face went pale as he reached out to pull Tommy back down into his seat, while Carol covered her face with her hands in a mixture of mortification and disbelief. The silence in the venue was deafening and seemed to stretch on forever, though in reality, it probably lasted only a few seconds. Tommy, suddenly aware of the magnitude of what he had done and feeling the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. But even in his moment of panic, his musical convictions remained strong. He knew he was right about the key being wrong, and he genuinely believed that Elvis would want to know. On stage, Elvis looked out into the audience, trying to locate the source of the interruption. His expression was initially one of surprise and confusion, but as his eyes found Tommy, a small boy standing among the seated adults, his face flushed red with embarrassment, but his posture still defiant, something remarkable happened. Instead of showing anger or irritation, Elvis's face broke into a slow, genuine smile. "Well now," Elvis said into the microphone, his voice carrying a mixture of amusement and curiosity. "It sounds like we have a young music critic in the audience tonight." The tension in the room began to ease slightly as people heard the warmth in Elvis's tone, but everyone was still holding their breath to see how this unprecedented situation would unfold. Elvis set his guitar aside and stepped closer to the edge of the stage, shielding his eyes with his hand as he tried to get a better look at Tommy. "Son, did you just tell me I was doing something wrong?" he asked, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. There was no anger in his tone, only genuine curiosity and perhaps a hint of admiration for the boy's boldness. Tommy, despite his embarrassment, found his voice and called back, "Yes, sir. You started Can't Help Falling in Love in the key of G, but it should be in C. That's why it sounds wrong." A murmur went through the audience as people began to understand what had just happened. This wasn't just a random interruption from a restless child. This was a musically knowledgeable young fan who had identified a genuine technical issue and had been brave enough to speak up about it. Elvis paused for a moment, then picked up his guitar and played a few chords in both keys. Comparing them, his smile grew wider as he realized that the boy was absolutely correct. "You know what, son? You're absolutely right." He looked out at the audience and chuckled. "I started that song in the wrong key, and this young man caught it before I could muddle through the whole thing. The audience began to relax, and even chuckle as they realized they were witnessing something special. Not a disruption of the concert, but an unexpected moment of genuine musical education and humility from one of the world's biggest stars. "What's your name, young man?" Elvis asked, his voice warm and encouraging. "Tommy Harrison," the boy replied, his confidence slowly returning as he realized that Elvis wasn't angry with him. "Well, Tommy Harrison," Elvis said, "it takes a real musician to catch a mistake like that, and it takes real courage to speak up about it. I appreciate you keeping me honest." He turned to address the entire audience. "Folks, this is why music is so beautiful. It brings out honesty in people. This young man loves music enough to make sure it's done right, even if it means correcting Elvis Presley in front of all you fine people." The audience erupted into applause, not just for Elvis's gracious response, but for Tommy's musical knowledge and courage. Tommy felt a wave of relief and pride wash over him as he realized that his interruption had been not only forgiven, but actually appreciated. "Now, Tommy," Elvis continued, "since you know the right key, would you like to come up here and help me start this song over the right way?" The audience gasped, and then burst into even louder applause at this unprecedented invitation. Tommy looked up at his parents, who, despite their initial shock, were now beaming with pride. His father gave him an encouraging nod, and his mother squeezed his shoulder supportively. With his heart pounding but his musical convictions stronger than ever, Tommy made his way through the row of seats and walked down the aisle toward the stage. Security personnel, initially moving to intercept what they might have perceived as an unwelcome stage invasion, stepped aside when Elvis waved them off and gestured for Tommy to come up. As Tommy climbed the steps to the Grand Ole Opry stage, the same stage that had hosted legends like Hank Williams, Patsy Cline, and Johnny Cash, he felt as though he was walking into a dream. But this wasn't a dream. This was real life, and Elvis Presley was waiting for him with a warm smile and an outstretched hand. "Come on over here, Tommy," Elvis said, guiding the boy to stand beside him at center stage. "Now, you said this should be in the key of C, right?" "Yes, sir," Tommy replied, his voice now picked up by Elvis's microphone and carrying clearly through the venue. "In C, your voice sits more naturally, and the melody flows better. It doesn't strain your vocal cords, and it matches the emotional tone of the lyrics." Elvis looked genuinely impressed by Tommy's technical knowledge and musical understanding. "You know your music theory, son. Who taught you all this?" "My dad plays sessions here in Nashville, and my mom teaches piano," Tommy explained. "But mostly I just listen really carefully to music. I can hear when something's not quite right." "Well, that's a rare gift," Elvis said, picking up his guitar again. "Let's do this song the way it's supposed to be done." He looked out at the audience with a grin. "With a little help from my new musical director here." Elvis positioned his hands on the guitar and looked down at Tommy. "You count us in, son. Make sure I start in the right key this time." Tommy took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, but also the joy of being part of creating music with his hero. 1, 2, 3, 4. He counted clearly into the microphone. Elvis began the opening chords of "Can't Help Falling in Love" in the correct key of C, and the difference was immediately apparent. The song flowed naturally and beautifully, Elvis's voice soaring effortlessly over the gentle guitar accompaniment. The melody had its characteristic warmth and intimacy, and Elvis looked visibly more comfortable and confident as he sang. But the magic of the moment went beyond just the technical correction. As Elvis sang, he occasionally looked down at Tommy, who was standing beside him with a huge smile on his face, sometimes quietly singing along. The image of the world's biggest music star sharing his stage with an 8-year-old boy who had corrected his musical mistake created a powerful visual that would be remembered long after the last note faded away. When the song ended, the audience gave a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. They were applauding not just the beautiful performance, but the extraordinary grace and humility that Elvis had shown in turning a potentially embarrassing moment into something magical. They were also celebrating Tommy's courage and musical knowledge and the beautiful example of mentorship and respect for musical truth that they had just witnessed. Elvis put his arm around Tommy's shoulders and spoke to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've been performing for a lot of years, and I've learned that the best musicians are always learning, always open to being better. This young man reminded me tonight that music is bigger than any one person, even bigger than Elvis Presley. When someone loves music enough to speak up for what's right, we should listen. He looked down at Tommy with genuine admiration. Tommy, you've got the ears of a true musician and the heart of an artist. Don't ever lose that honesty about music. Even when it's hard to speak up, music needs people like you. Tommy looked up at Elvis with tears of joy and gratitude in his eyes. Thank you, Mr. Elvis. I just want music to be as beautiful as it can be. And that's exactly the right attitude, son, Elvis replied. Keep that passion, keep learning, and keep speaking up for music. As Tommy returned to his seat to thunderous applause, the rest of the concert took on an even more special quality. Elvis seemed energized and inspired by the interaction, and his subsequent performances were some of the most heartfelt and technically perfect of his career. He frequently glanced over at Tommy during songs, sometimes with a smile and a nod when he executed a particularly challenging passage correctly. After the concert, Elvis made sure that Tommy and his family were invited backstage for a personal meeting. Away from the stage lights and the audience, Elvis spent nearly an hour talking with Tommy about music, asking him about his favorite songs, his musical training, and his aspirations. He signed several items for Tommy, but the most meaningful gift was a small pitch pipe that Elvis had used for years to help him find the correct starting keys for songs. This has helped me stay in tune for more years than I can count, Elvis told Tommy as he placed the pitch pipe in the boy's hands. I want you to have it, so you can always help other musicians find their right key, just like you helped me tonight. Tommy treasured that pitch pipe for the rest of his life, and the story of the night he corrected Elvis Presley became a defining moment in his musical development. The confidence and validation he received from Elvis that evening gave him the courage to continue speaking up for musical excellence throughout his life. As Tommy grew older, he became a respected musician in his own right, working as a producer and arranger for some of Nashville's biggest stars. He often told the story of his encounter with Elvis, always emphasizing the lesson in humility and openness that Elvis had demonstrated that night. Tommy learned that being right about music wasn't as important as being gracious about music, and that the best musicians are those who can accept criticism and correction with dignity and appreciation. The story of Tommy's brave interruption and Elvis's gracious response became legendary in Nashville music circles and beyond. It was often cited as an example of how true musical greatness includes the humility to accept input from anyone who genuinely loves music, regardless of their age or status. Music journalists and biographers who wrote about Elvis in later years frequently mentioned the Tommy Harrison incident as one of the most revealing moments of Elvis's character. It showed a side of the king of rock and roll that went beyond his fame and charisma. It revealed a man who truly respected music itself and was willing to put his ego aside in service of musical truth. For Tommy, the experience shaped not only his musical career, but his entire approach to life. He learned that speaking up for what you believe in, even when it's difficult or socially awkward, can lead to beautiful and unexpected outcomes. He also learned that true greatness lies not in never making mistakes, but in how gracefully you handle correction when mistakes are pointed out. The Grand Ole Opry, recognizing the significance of that evening, eventually installed a small plaque commemorating the night when a young music lover's courage to speak truth created one of the most beautiful moments in our venue's history. The plaque serves as a reminder that music belongs to everyone who loves it deeply enough to care about getting it right. Years later, when Tommy had children of his own, he would take them to concerts and teach them to listen carefully to the music. But he also taught them Elvis's lesson about grace and humility. explaining that being right about something is only valuable if you handle it with kindness and respect for others. The pitch pipe that Elvis gave Tommy that night remained one of his most treasured possessions, but more than that, it served as a symbol of the moment when his love of musical accuracy was validated by the greatest entertainer of his generation. It reminded him daily that music is a shared language that brings people together, and that even the biggest stars are, at heart, just people who love music and want to share that love with others. The legacy of that extraordinary evening continued to inspire musicians and music lovers for generations. It became a story that was told and retold in music schools, recording studios, and concert halls around the world. It served as a reminder that music is a living, breathing art form that requires honesty, courage, and humility from everyone who participates in it. In the end, Tommy's brave interruption of Elvis Presley's concert became more than just a memorable moment. It became a testament to the power of speaking truth with love, the importance of musical integrity, and the beautiful things that can happen when courage meets grace. It showed that even the king of rock and roll was, above all, a servant to the music he loved so deeply.